Welcome back to Channel Water. Today we're going to talk about structures in society, the human story, the division that we have, how our society is divided to two, and about Channel Water specifically, how the things we talk about here are outside of that division, outside of the social structures that the mainstream exist within, which is also part of why Channel Water is not content for the mainstream or understood by it. Within the human story, there are structures, and most of them fall within a division of two. Just like we see the yin and yang symbol, in that same way, most of our structures fall into one or another category. And the biggest ones that we see is usually our political system, left and right, the division within our own bodies, male, female, and the breakdown goes on from there. And everywhere you go, you will find two categories, usually two sides, and they're in some kind of opposition, yet they also work together. They also generate motivation from one another. And that is really where that symbol of the yin and yang came from and what it represents. When we look at the two sides from outside, you see them as an engine. You actually see them in movement and almost chasing each other, which creates that movement, this engine of life, both motivation, yet there's some friction. There's this constant movement, making something out of nothing, right? We're taking one body, dividing it to two, creating a certain separation and difference, and now, like a magnet, it rolls back and chasing itself. And that's what the division within our society is designed to do. We can see that even in our bodies, our brain is divided to left and right. Our society is divided to left and right. And we give them certain characters. And from even our brain to our society, we say that the right is a certain way, the left is a certain way. One side is more conservative, the other side is more creative, and different functions, different things they care about. And it really fractals out, which means it's both in the smaller scale and the bigger scale, the same thing. And we find that within our own society, and somehow everything that we work for, care about, fight for, protect, eventually falls into one of the two categories. So when we meet a person that is left or right, we can know at that moment what they think about for many different issues as they fall into the left and right. And even if they don't think about it that way, the two sides having such strong character, they pull into them people, and we are getting divided by those structures. So you find yourself into the left, into the right, depending on your basic opinion about certain issues, social, economical, foreign policy, any of those things. And then the rest gets filled in by that group that you end up belonging to. But what's interesting is that each side thinks that the other side is wrong. And each side thinks that they're the good ones. The other side is the bad. Both sides think that the devil is in the other side. The other side is either ignorant or they mean to do you harm. So there's a strong division. There's a really strong separation between the two sides. And you can see how both sides use the other as a motivation, both in a negative way of fear, hate, and both in creating the sense of we are right, we are the good people. What we're doing is good. We're here to improve the world. What's unique to what we talk about here in Channel Water is that we're looking at it from outside, we're seeing the body as a whole. So we're seeing the whole thing as one. And when you look at it that way, you see that both sides are right at the same time. Just like my brain, left and right, serves one body. So even within the conflicts, the issues, the discussions, the arguments, they eventually lead me as one body to make decisions on certain issues as I move forward in life. The same thing happens to us as the bigger consciousness as we make decisions as we move forward. A good example to that is politics, for example, how all those discussions that we're having, to the person that is inside of left or right, looking at the other side, they see it as, they see the division, they see the separation, they live it. They are inside of the separation and they're on one side. When in reality, both sides are actually working together, but all of this is actually internal conversations. Like you will have a discussion in your head about something you're going to do. Should you do it? You value the pros, the cons. You value the past, the future, the present, and then you try to come to a decision. Same thing happens in our society as we look at our collective memory of the past. We talk about what's going to happen in the future, and then we have the present moment, which is usually torn between the two, which is part of that division that we have. So you will see that certain voices are pulling forward. Certain voices are trying to keep things as they are, or even take them back to the way they used to be. And then here in the present, we're taking small steps towards the future, which is just inevitable, because we are constantly living the present moment, which means we're constantly moving forward. So we can't go back, we can't leap forward to the future, but the changes are happening here and now, and we're doing the best we can to do them in a stable, slow, and safe way. And that's really the main thing, is not to move too fast to any one direction before we have enough information about how it's going to affect us in the long run. Everything I said until now sounds very abstract, so I'll give you an example to how does that actually reflect in the way we think today and our movement toward the future. Our future is very different from what the present is now. And our present now is very different from the way we lived 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, and more. So we are constantly in the transition between those different lives, basically. So, for example, I personally believe that we will expand out to the stars and live infinitely and grow infinitely out into space. And we have a video about that, which is called The Purpose of Human Beings, and that explains exactly how Earth is just it's like an egg that we hatch from, and the majority of our life and future will actually be in space. And out there we'll create independence for life in space. It will be independent from things like weather, all the issues we have here on Earth, like from earthquakes to tsunamis, issues of energy, materials. Once we create a certain freedom from all that, and we'll have sustainable living out in space, whether it is on a space station or colonies on different planets. A society in space is very different from a society on Earth. And that's something that most of us living here on Earth now don't think about or understand. And as we're moving forward, we're thinking about that future. We're thinking about those structures that we'll have, social structures that we'll have in space, which don't necessarily fit to the life we have here now. So there's a certain friction And there's certain problems when we try to introduce those things while we're here. Yet we have to create certain social structures for living in a completely different condition. Here on Earth, you can go find a piece of land, build a house, create a business, and live the life that we have now, which is a certain type of capitalism, and we have many different forms of that. But when we go to space, it's going to be a very different reality. How are we going to space? Who is doing what? It's not the same way that you can just go and find a piece of land here, find a job. Who is employing? What is the land you're buying? If you're in a space station, how does any of that even make sense? So when we look at life in space, we look at life that it's much more cellular. Suddenly you're a cell in a bigger body, and that bigger body has to be understood much better as far as a social structure. How do we structure that? Are you getting paid? Are you getting food, water? Who's in control of that? What is your individual role in that body? Who's going to protect your rights? So suddenly we realize that there's a completely different future ahead of us that we have to design and care for. And when we think about that future and we try to implement it here on Earth, it doesn't make sense. And it causes problems. And then you start seeing divisions and friction between different sides, where one of them sees the future, one sees the past and present, and like I said, we're in the middle. We're in the transition between the two. So the healthy way of looking at it is seeing how everybody is right at the same time, but also understanding where does each piece fit within our timeline as we're moving into the future. If we look at life in space, it looks something more like a communist utopian dream, which here does not work and has been tried and failed many times. Yet, maybe if we look at a different type of society in space, over there, that's the only way to go. If you have to provide people with salary, food, water, how do you create motivation? Their motivation to work and be part of that society, we have to figure that out, because we know that when those things were tried in the past, they failed because people lost motivation, people lost the will and the creativity, the innovation, and there was a lot of corruption too. So once we shift into living out of motivation, which is positive, out of just being alive and being part of life, being part of that collective body, maybe that will be possible. Because on the other hand, we don't want to send people to space like we do now. The closest thing to it is actually our military, where you have a group of people that belong to a certain body, like a military, and everyone are soldiers. And they do what they're told. They get very small reward for it. And I don't think that's the way to go into the future. All of the options in front of us look bad when we're here on Earth, trying to evaluate them in the way we live now. And that is why it's okay and important to have those discussions, have that negotiation, have that conversations as we move in towards that future, which is right now a big unknown. But it's up to us to design it and to design also our society moving towards it. And in some ways, that is what's happening. And for some people, it feels scary because it doesn't fit here on Earth. It won't work here. So it's scary. You don't want to see your life get ruined here and now. But if we capsule it in a way that we know what is the purpose of that discussion and where we're going with it, it can be much more productive and conductive. The main thing that I care about is to have a constructive rather than destructive discussion as we move forward. As that yin and yang is spinning, as the left and right is fighting, the main thing is to create more and not less, to create and not destroy. So we're, like I said, the nature is in the business of construction. We're building life. Plants, buildings, space stations, they're all the same. It's architecture for life. And the goal is for life to grow, expand infinitely into space. We're creating new life forms, we're creating new places for us to grow into and live. We have an entire ocean to house, and we know there's not enough space here for that architecture. We know that the goal is to have the ocean and water be completely independent out in space. Once you see that our society is a large mind, it's one big mind with many, many voices, many thoughts and ideas. And like we talked in the video about personality, they all come from a site-specific knowledge and site-specific experience, right? We are many, many sensors out there. Each one of us gets different information and feedback, different experiments, whether they're scientific or social. We try them all, and then we take them out and we compare them between the different countries, between the different social experiments, basically. And we decide what is best, what works best, how to move forward and expand out to space. But understanding that we are one mind, just like in your mind, there's many different thoughts going in many different directions. But eventually, the goal is to make the right decision and to move forward. So in the same way, all the conversations we're having with each other are actually internal conversations that the bigger body is having and discussing as we're moving forward. And the thing that I would like to promote is to find that space, to have that conversation without the fear, anger, frustration, and the sense of separation, which then leads to violence and destruction. Our goal is, no matter what, to build more and not destroy. So once you see that both sides are right at the same time, just about different things in different timelines, in different places altogether, then it's easier to have that conversation and acknowledge what the other side brings to the table that is right, what their issues are, and how to help them. And then you get the same in return. Channel water is designed for people that are outside of the left-right equation, that are outside of the story, the main story, the mainstream. This channel is never for the mainstream, and it won't be ever. Because when you are inside of that world, inside of that human story, you can't look at this knowledge or talk about those things in any way, because you immediately get triggered the left, right, and you see it now with politics. There's no way to enter that conversation in the way that we do. So we stay outside of that conversation and we look at it from outside. And that's why channel water is never a mainstream subject of conversation or discussion. But on the other hand, for people that don't need this knowledge, that don't look for the meaning of life, because they're living it, it's important to understand that the meaning of life is living it, is being in it. For most people that are born into healthy environments, they are occupied with life itself, and that's what they're supposed to do. So family, hobbies, school, work, relationships, all kind of interest, from sports, music to dance. You have a complete life that immerses you in, and you don't have that time or need to look for any further meaning for the bigger picture. because you are living it. That is the meaning of life. That is where we are supposed to be. For people that are usually seekers and that we look for a bigger meaning, is because we don't have that. Our environments did not give us that. So we were outsiders to that human story. And for us to feel good about life, we need to find meaning within it. Finding that meaning, because it's not available in those elements, like I said, family, relationships, work, we have to find it in something bigger and something outside of the human story. It could be anything from plants, connection to plants, animal, the spiritual journey, mythology, religion. We find connections to the bigger story of life outside of the human story, not through the human connection necessarily. And we find the bigger meaning of life. And it's not different or better. It's just something we can deal with and process. A lot of times people wonder why the subjects we talk about here, not more people are talking about them or interested in. That's not a bad thing. If people are occupied with life itself, that's great. That is really why they're here for. There's nothing more important than family, relationships, work, building, growing. Again, it's all about architecture of life, and the human story is a mechanism to build that. And being inside of it is what we're supposed to do. And where you're inside of it in a healthy way, it's very joyful, it's very good. When you're inside of it and you don't feel that joy, then we seek it and we find it in other places, which to me was great. The fact that there is another place, another layer of life that we can find meaning within. We can find joy, we can find motivation, and really enjoy life itself. So there is a place for everyone within life, the bigger story of life. And sometimes it's just outside of the human story. But it's not better or different. It's just another layer. This video started as a response to the question of where do people belong within this type of knowledge? Where does this channel belong? Why it's not bigger, smaller? And then I started thinking about the people that are outside of the human story. Why we are outside. Is it good or bad? And then it immediately brought, the whole left and right, politics, and of course events that are happening currently in the political world around us, which I stay away from because we're not inside of that story. Since we are outside of it, the things we talk about here are actually timeless. It could be relevant at any given moment within our life, while the political events are not. They're very specific to the moment, to the events, sites, people. And I think that it is important to see the symbol of yin and yang, which we all know and feels almost like a cliche. But the one thing that you have to notice is that within each side, the center of it is the color of the other side. To see that the engine of it is actually the opposite side. And that's what happens in real life. When you dive in further and further, both, let's say, into the left or into the right, the deeper you go, you'll actually find the other end, the other opposite end. They are connected. In today's video, I just want to help those that have a lot of stress and anxiety from the political division, from that sense of separation, and to encourage you to try and see that we are one big mind, that we do have conflicting thoughts and ideas, that we are in movement towards a different future from a different past, and to find a way to have a more constructive and peaceful way of having those discussions, being able to listen to both sides And for people that are outside of the human story, it's up to us to find the connection, the motivation, the meaning within life that is outside of the normal human story, and that we can find it within connection to bigger things and different things from the human story. Like I said, it could be gardening, it could be animal, a pet, it could be within meditation and more spiritual connection to different layers within this life. But there are many different kinds of ways to find meaning and ways to find motivation within life. And for us, it's important not to judge other people that have a different motivation or that are on the other side from the left and right, from that yin and yang. And when you look at that symbol, you will see that your side is actually in the center of the other. It's what motivates it and moves it. So within that symbol, the center, the dot, that is the center of that movement that keeps it spinning, is actually the other side. We are what moves and motivates each other. And that's a good thing, because that's the engine of life that we have to keep going. That's how we create something out of nothing. And that's what our life is that creation. Because we come from absolutely nothing. Absolute no space, no place. And everything around you right now is the architecture we have built, the life that we have built for us to be in, which is much better than that absolute nothingness. I hope that today's video was helpful for people that needed to hear this now. And if you have any questions or ideas, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you soon.